My topic today is the growing problem of Islam, an atheist view. Geert Wilders, in his speech in Australia last year, particularly welcomed the participation of atheists and humanists. So I am an atheist and a humanist, and I am delighted to be here. Thank you. We may have our differences regarding religions, and some of you will differ with what I say, but we are all on the same side. We all recognise that Islam is a significant problem that we need to deal with. Most people, unfortunately, don't. This applies to many of my atheist and humanist colleagues. They strive to be opposed to all religions equally, but some religions are worse than others. By any reasonable objective criteria, Islam is the worst. We need to recognise this. I may also say that I come from a different political perspective than many of you, so you may disagree with me on some issues. Again, when it comes to recognising the perils of Islam, we are all on the same side. I don't see why it should be a left-wing or right-wing issue. We simply need to be aware of the facts. Islam is a danger, a threat, and it causes immense suffering. Anyone, whatever their political persuasion, should be able to recognise that. Recognition of the facts does not make us extremists. I am a humanitarian and a social liberal. That is why I am opposed to Islam. Islam causes suffering and oppression, especially for women. Those that suffer from it most are the Muslims themselves. Hence, as Geert Wilders and many others have stated, we are not against Muslims, we are against Islam. It has nothing to do with racism. Those who claim to be feminists and humanitarians but turn a blind eye to the misogyny and the social oppression in Islam, they are the hypocrites. We need to raise people's consciousness. We need to focus on the facts. I have participated in quite a number of debates at universities against Islamist opponents, and where I have sought to present the facts. Of course, we don't expect people to change their views as a result of a single debate. Such beliefs are often held in blatant defiance of facts. But what is valuable, I think, in such debates is to see how our opponents behave and the arguments that they do put on the public record. So I'll just go into a couple of my experiences. At one debate at the University of Western Sydney, my opponents were from Hizb ut-Tahrir, which is an Islamic anti-democratic organisation. At one point during that debate, someone shouted in the audience, "Islam will conquer the world." The entire Muslim audience erupted in cheers at that. It was a frightening experience for my co-debaters and many of the atheists in the audience. At a more recent debate at La Trobe University, the audience was more subdued, but the arguments they put were equally shocking. These opponents were academics, and one, Muhammad Tabar, is a member of the Islamic Council of Victoria. So we can assume that their views are authoritative. Their arguments were dressed up in the fraudulent rhetoric of postmodernist relativism, where objective reality is denied and all reality is supposed to be just socially constructed and simply the result of power relations in society. These are sham arguments where the truth is arbitrary and anything can be justified. Yet the Quran is true according to them. In fact, religious views are almost invariably the result of socialisation or indoctrination. Religious identity is not part of our genetic inheritance. What was interesting about the debaters' arguments about the superiority of Islam was that they quite openly admitted that Islam is incompatible with democracy. So the proposition that Islam is a fascist ideology is actually supported by our most authoritative Islamic spokesman. This includes Mohammed Tabar, who yesterday criticised the Q Society as being extreme. So it's like this. If Islamists say they reject democracy, that is not extreme. But if we quote them as saying that, we are extreme. Actually, the Quran is not easy to read because it is so full of egregious content. In that debate, in another debate, I referred to chapter 65, verse 4 of the Quran, which details provisions for divorcing wives, including those who have not yet menstruated. I asked my opponents how sex with children could be consistent with morality. I expected they would try to avoid my question and obfuscate. Instead, as per the Quran, they openly defended and condoned and even advocated the rape of children. I really found their attitude so appalling and disgusting, I almost felt like walking out of the debate. In fact, I did feel like that. How does this situation arise? Why is it we are experiencing this surge in Islamic activism, and why is it such a growing problem? The secularization hypothesis was that as people become more educated and more informed, religious belief would fall away. I have not given up hope, but this has not happened yet, and especially for Islam, it's the reverse. My explanation is increased indoctrination in schools. In Muslim countries, as elsewhere, as living standards rise, so does school attendance. But in Muslim countries, a large part of the curriculum is devoted to religion, and Islam is taught as fact. Hence, more education means more indoctrination, means more Islamism. This is a growing problem because Islam is inevitably associated with violence, oppression, and social, economic, and political dysfunction. As Islam gets worse, these problems get worse. 10 years ago, I wrote an article in Free Inquiry magazine about the systemic problems in Arab societies that were highlighted in the United Nations Arab Human Development Reports. These were a series of reports written by Arab scholars who found that in Arab countries they were deficient according to a wide range of measures compared with other similar countries. The reports identified three major deficits. These were in freedom, women's empowerment, and knowledge. I pointed out what the Arab authors could not. The reasons that the Islamic countries suffer from these three deficits was Islam itself. I do not need to remind this audience how Islam denies freedom, disempowers women, and denies knowledge. I might point out how intellectually isolated Muslim and Arab societies are. You might know that in the Middle Ages, the printing press was prohibited in the Muslim world for 300 years after it was invented and proliferated in Europe. In similar vein, the UN reports highlighted similar instances. For example, the fact that the number of books translated into Spanish each year is 1,000 times the number translated into Arabic. As an economist, I know the importance of raising productivity through research, development and innovation and investment in technology. But in the Arab world, expenditure on this is minuscule. The reports noted a political and social and economic context inimical to the development of science. This deprivation can be related to the Islamic concept of bid'ah, or aversion to innovation. The economic costs in terms of this loss in human welfare were enormous, as I suggested in 2004. 10 years later, the situation in the Arab world is immeasurably worse. Violence has increased, the Arab Spring revolutions have come and gone, multifaceted civil war in Syria, all in the name of Allah, has led to the destruction of a third of the housing stock in Syria and 2.2 million refugees, a tenth of the population. In Egypt, an Islamist government has been replaced by a military regime. Islamist governments are intolerable even for Muslims. But these events are not new. The turmoil is something that has occurred repeatedly in Muslim countries throughout Islamic history. Karl Marx once said that when history repeats first as tragedy, second as farce. But this endless repetition of the cycle of violence in Muslim countries is becoming catastrophic. If we project this trend forward for another 10 years, what will the situation look like? We may be looking at more Muslim countries descending into chaotic violence and failed state status. These are governance issues that affect the entire world community. We must not only stop the Islamisation of nations. Those nations desperately need to be de-Islamised. Eventually, it must come to the point where the dangers of Islam must be recognised. Yet we are very far from this recognition now. Deniers, wishful thinkers cling to the belief that, and the deception that true Islam is peaceful and only extremists are the problem. As an ex-Muslim Ali Rizvi put it, if Islam were peaceful, then Islamic extremists would be extremely peaceful. They're not. How does this fiction persist? A typical instance surrounds the murder of British soldier Lee Rigby. The murderers explained in some gruesome detail on television they were acting in accordance with their Islamic duties. Yet Prime Minister David Cameron describes their actions as a betrayal of Islam. That comment is either delusion or deception. In sentencing, the judge repeated the same phrase, betrayal of Islam. It's a lie, the murderer called out. But the murderer was correct and the Prime Minister and the judge were wrong. Violent jihad in emulation of the Prophet Muhammad is a sacred duty of the Muslim. The murderer, in the circumstances, was doing nothing more than his faith commanded. The extremists are not an aberration. Islam is extreme. How is it that people are so blind to the true nature of Islam? Well, the answer from my atheist perspective is this. For psychological reasons, people believe what they want to believe, not what is actually true. It's willful blindness. Unfortunately, I think many ways our society actually encourages this type of behaviour, particularly with the nonsense notion that all religions are equally true. In such compartmentalised aspects of our lives, truth is arbitrary and relativism reigns supreme. But the quest for truth, based on scientific method, is the driving force behind progress of civilization. We must not forsake this quest. relativism is the notion that all views are equal irrespective of merit. Cultural relativism says that all cultures should be respected, again, irrespective of merit. But they are not equal. We should not be abandoning objective standards. But what standard should we use? What is liberty and how do we define freedom? May I suggest that we might refer to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. In Islam, humans do not have rights, only Allah has rights. Islamic countries want to abandon the Universal Declaration and replace it with their own Islamic rights. But they can't, thanks to the good old United Nations. Everyone thinks their own religion is true, but this is cultural arrogance. There are no chosen people, there is no promised land. We need to demythologise religions and instead rely on reason, evidence and critical thinking. How about this for a suggestion? We get all the governments of the world to commission an intergovernmental panel at the United Nations to gather all the scientific evidence and answer this question: if any, which religion is true? Naturally, when all the world's scientists report their findings, the result would surely be accepted. All deniers and special interest peddlers would have to change their minds. If not, the consequences could be dire. They will be dire. I think we need to abandon ancient cultural superstitions. We certainly need to abandon ancient perceptions of morality which forbid a woman to show her face or hair. We need to aspire to a world based on reason, rationality, and where the universal principles of compassion, freedom, honesty, and justice are the main points of our moral compass. Thank you.